from the National Magazine Awards Foundation and the Authors Award from the Foundation for the Advancement of Canadian Letters. She received the Amnesty International Media Award in 2000, 2002, and again in 2011. Her awards also include the 2003 Foundation Award for Outstanding Achievement from the National Magazine Awards Foundation, the 2005 International Women's Alliance World of Difference Award, the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Canadian Journalism Foundation in 2008, and in 2010 she became the 4th recipient of the Calgary Peace Prize. She's also the recipient of 7 honorary doctorate degrees and is a member of the Order of Canada. Her excellence in journalism and steadfast commitment to changing the status of women at home and abroad have earned her membership to the International Women's Commission, a UN body that consists of 20 Palestinian women, 20 Israeli women, and 12 internationals, whose mandate is to assist with the path to peace in the Middle East. Ms. Armstrong has written several books and countless articles documenting the status of women in Canada and around the world. For 25 years, many of the stories she has told document incomprehensible atrocities against women and girls. However, her hard work, dedication, and incredible courage have paid off big time. She is now the one who gets to break the story of how women and girls, in spite of seemingly insurmountable odds, are winning the fight against oppression, violence, and injustice, and in doing so, are making the world a more humane, just, and peaceful place for us all. Tonight, we are the lucky ones who will hear her speak of this incredible triumph documented in a recent and outstanding book, Ascent of Women, Our Turn, Our Way, a remarkable story of worldwide change. Please join me in welcoming Sally Armstrong.
She was the one who was smart enough to finally come to Nelson. Today I've had the best time and I'm moving here tomorrow. Fortunate you are to live in a place like this, and I think I met almost everybody. So as Carolee said, who's my new friend, I'm a journalist. I work in zones of conflict, and my beat is to find out what happens to women and girls in these places. So to be honest, I've been doing this for 25 years. I haven't had any good news stories to tell, but now I do. It was about, I think, 3 years ago that I started to realize the earth was shifting under the status of women. At first, I thought it was probably wishful thinking on my part, but you know, I rushed out, I did the research, I found out I was right, and selfishly, I wanted to be the first one to get this into a book. So I put everything else on hold, and that's why I wrote the book. It means the world to me, this book. You know, women the world over, from Kabul and Cairo to New York and Nairobi, are owning their own space and their own voice in ways they have never owned them before. And because of that, they're propelling changes so immense that those with the power and the ability to examine these issues claim that this can alter the most intractable files we've ever dealt with: poverty, conflict, violence. It can even bring a true accounting at last to culture and religion. And what's more, suddenly the power brokers are listening. Now, I don't want to sell you a bill of goods here. This is not about giving the little woman a fair break. It's not even about obeying those hard-fought-for international laws. What this is about is money. It's always about money. The world has finally figured out that they can no longer afford to oppress half of the world's population. It was the economist Jeffrey Sachs who said, the status of women and the economy are directly related. Where one's flourishing, so is the other. Where one's in the ditch, so is the other. I dare say the people sitting in this room knew that a couple of decades ago. But when Jeffrey Sachs says it, it gets traction.
Who's he?
He doesn't come from Nelson, who cares? The person who's been maybe the most outspoken on the international stage is Hillary Clinton, and she said, while I was doing this research, she said, there's 39 civil wars going on in the world today. 31 of them are old wars. They keep restarting. Why? Because they end with ceasefires of exhaustion, rather than ceasefires that address what truly is wrong. And she said, what is truly wrong is the same in every single civil war. 3 things: poverty, lack of education, and the oppression of women. Nobody ever talked that way before. You know, the pendulum is swinging now. As I did this research, I realized it was swinging so hard and so fast that I could hardly keep up with the changes. However, as I spoke about it, people said, what are you talking about? Look at the paper. Look at the stuff we're reading about in the paper. How can you be so positive about these changes for women? So let's talk about Malala Yousafzai. She was the 15-year-old girl, remember, who was in the Swat Valley in Pakistan and decided that despite the Taliban's threats, she was going to go to school. And the Taliban, this bunch of dumb thugs who claim they act in the name of God, shot a 15-year-old girl in the head for going to school. I can tell you absolutely that 3 years ago, we would never have heard Malala's story. Because over there, they would have said, it's a girl, who cares? And if we did hear it, we'd whisper behind our hands to our friends, and we'd say, you know, the way they treat their women and girls is truly appalling, but there's nothing we can do about that. Malala's story was in every newspaper around the world, on every radio broadcast, on every television report, and she never left the news. When they transferred her, remember, from Islamabad to England for surgery, she was back in the news. I remember the Globe and Mail did a 1/3 page diagram of the cranial surgery they were going to do on this kid and the cochlear implant they were going to put in to try to get some of her hearing back. I was in Victoria at the end of February that year, and CTV News called me and said, hurry, hurry, go to the studio, we need a hit. Malala, just get her to the hospital. And the week after that, she was back in the news, going back to school with her little pink backpack slung on her back. Malala became the world's daughter. That would never have happened before. It happened because the earth is shifting. We were available to hear this story. It's like we lifted up a curtain and looked at these facts and said, what the heck were we thinking? Of course these kids have to go to school. Of course they have to learn to think for themselves. This is what's new in the world today. And this is the change that I wanted to record in this book. So I had to look at what happened, what caused the earth to shift. And you and I know the women's movement was really a Western women's movement. It wasn't hugely embraced in any significant degree by Asian women or African women. It was North American women, European women, UK women, Australian women, etc. So as I did the research, I started to see there were 2 very distinct things that happened. One I call distortion, the other I call disease. Let's look at distortion. With the rise of Islamism in the 1990s, women in Asia began to realize that they had become the target of extremists in their own religion. They realized they had to form groups in order to fight back. And the groups they formed were sensational. One is called, the one I work with the most is called Women Living Under Muslim Laws. Their research is impeccable. They're outspoken, they're articulate. They're not afraid of taking on every boogeyman that the fundamentalists throw at them. They're doing a sensational job, and they call women around the world to take action. If a woman is being sent to jail, or God forbid being stoned to death, they put out an action call, and they reverse so many of these horrible stories. So let's look at disease. With HIV/AIDS racing through Africa, the women I interviewed all over Africa said, you know what? We don't have the right to say no to sex. And Sipiwe Halope in Swaziland, who was leading the movement there, said, we had to form groups, because if we didn't take on the impunity of men when it came to sex, we'd all be dead. So I looked at that, I thought, well, there's all these women in Asia forming these terrific groups, and there's women in Africa doing the same thing. And you know, at about that time, the information-based society burst onto the scene. And that really created, well, it contributed to a woman's style of management hitting the mainstream networks rather than hierarchies, and shared leadership rather than top-down leadership, top-down management. These became the new touchstones in the corporate world. I thought maybe that was it. But you know what, it wasn't. I examined this collection of data, and I knew that wasn't what created this massive shift that is going on now. And then I realized what it was. You know what it was? It was Facebook. It was Facebook, and Twitter, and blogging, and emails, and internet activity. Because what happened was that women the world over started either speaking directly to each other or reading about each other. And women wearing hijab found out that despite what the fundamentalists had told them, women wearing jeans were not all whores after all. And women wearing jeans found out, despite what they'd heard, women wearing hijab had plenty to say, and plenty of very valuable opinions that needed to come to the table. Together, the women around the world learned that the impunity and the power of opportunistic men was holding them all back, was hurting their children, was making the future bleak. And in the process of the discussion they had one with the other, they have become a force so powerful that everyone from pollsters to presidents is beginning to see women in a new light as the way to reduce poverty, to cut conflict, to improve the economy. I mean, who can argue with that kind of stuff? Centuries of women have worked toward this change. And you know, a new cohort, people say to me, oh, the young people don't care about the women's movement, feminism is dead. What rubbish. I speak all over the country, and I can tell you it all over many other countries. A new cohort of savvy young game changers has come along to activate this stage. They represent millions of women who've been trapped in religious dogma and caught in cultural contradictions. And until recently, they never dared to speak out. And the world, the whole world has been bullied into silence by the extremists who claim it's none of our business. Can you imagine? I started covering Afghanistan as soon as the Taliban took over in September 1996. I was their worst nightmare. They're always saying to me, you have no business writing about our women. You're not from here. You're not in our religion. You're not in our culture. It's not your business. Well, what happened to the women of Afghanistan and many countries around the world today is not cultural, it's criminal. And no, I won't stop writing about it. And it's everybody's business, and it's high time. I was just quoting a couple of men to prove my point. It's not nice, but I'm going to do it. One is an academic from Saudi Arabia. His name is Kamil Suki. And he decided he better address the Saudi Legislative Assembly when all this business started about women wanting to drive a car. And as you know, women have been agitating lately in the kingdom because they want to drive a car. They're the only country in the world where women are not allowed to drive a car. So the redoubtable Kamil Suki stood in front of the Saudi Legislative Assembly and he said, this is the problem. If women drive cars, that will spell the end of virginity in the kingdom. I was saying stuff like that. I was in the car quite recently. I drove my father's in the front seat, and I heard him on the radio. And it was just not so long ago when the Saudi women were really marching around the issue of driving a car, and he was on the radio, and you know what he said? He said, what people don't understand is that when a woman drives a car, she stops ovulating. And my friend said, God, I wish I'd known that. Not to be outdone, on this side of the water, we have the redoubtable Reverend Pat Robertson, who claims the feminist agenda is not about equal rights for women. It's about a socialist, anti-family political movement that encourages women to leave their husbands, kill their children, practice witchcraft, destroy capitalism, and become lesbians. When I go at a sign assignment to the places I cover around the world have started to sneer at old men with old customs. Women who never dared to speak up before are asking questions that have needed to be asked for centuries. These are the women who are denouncing cultural practices and bogus religious claims that have damaged them for decades, I dare say, centuries. Now they're asking questions they didn't dare ask before, such as, show me where it's written in the Quran that my daughter can't go to school. Well, it's not in the Quran. It's never been in the Quran. Or show me where it says I can't go to work. Well, that's not there either. And you know, I don't think it's a very good idea to lie to women. I dare say the worst day in the lives of fundamentalists, extremists, and misogynists was the day that women around the world started to talk to each other. So you know what? We can't claim to be at the finish line, not here, not in Saudi Arabia, not in any of the other countries where I tell stories in my book. But I can tell you we have traction like we have never had it before, and I will go so far as to say I believe women are reaching a tipping point. I tell this story, or I make this point in the book by telling stories about the women around the world, and I don't do politicians and presidents and generals and all that stuff. I do the women who are running the shelters, and I do the women who are plowing the fields. And these are the stories I use in my book, Ascent of Women, to prove this point, that the earth has shifted and we are moving toward a tipping point. I want to tell you tonight a short version of two of those stories. One comes from Afghanistan, the other one comes from Kenya. I just got back from Afghanistan a few weeks ago. I was there on assignment for McLean's. But when I was there about 8 months before, I was there because the young women have formed a group called Young Women for Change. And incredibly, in that group, there are as many young men. And I found, when I was in Cairo doing the Women of the Arab Spring, I found the same thing. When I went to the young women's groups, it was half young men. And I said to them in Cairo and again in Kabul, I said, why do you have the men joining you? And you know what they said to me? They said, we will never get to the finish line unless we walk together. Young people invariably, they're the ones who can do and say things that others can't. They haven't already heard that we've done that. It's not possible. They'll never give in. They're not immune to their ability to make change. This was started by two kids, one called Nurjahan Akbar, the other one Anita Haydery, ages 21 and 19 respectively. And they're doing this in a town. Well, their organization is as modern as it is provocative, and they're doing it in the center of the world's capital of female oppression, downtown Kabul. And they said to me, talk about only young people can say these things. They said, our aim is to alter the emotional landscape of Afghanistan. You know what? They can do it. They can pull it off. Nurjahan said to me, 67% of the population of Afghanistan is under the age of 30. She said, we never started a war. We never fought a war. And we hate these old customs they use to hurt people. We want change, and we have the tools to make change. And here's the kicker. She said, we're all on Facebook. That's what we're doing. But you know what? In Afghanistan, if you so much as whisper the word change, the fundamentals will go berserk, and they'll accuse you of trying to westernize Afghanistan. When I was first reporting from there in early '97, they used to scare the heck out of me by saying things like that. Because, you know, as a journalist, you want to make sure you get it right. But I soon figured out that anything that is close to on time, slightly less chaotic, a little bit non-cheating, that's what you call Western. Anyway, I said to these girls, I said, what do you do when the fundamentalists accuse you of westernizing Afghanistan? They didn't skip a beat. Anita said, I say to them, you think girls' education's Western? You think treating people decently is Western? You think human rights are Western? If that's Western, what's Eastern? What's Islam? I thought, oh my God, these kids are going to get killed. They are very bold. But they said to me when they started, and they're so straight up, she said, Anita said, you know, there's two of us. You can't start a movement with two people. So we went on Facebook and we invited our friends to meet us at a restaurant in Kabul. We were hoping 5 would come because with 5 you can start a movement. So 2 things happened. 1, 70 came, and 2, the proprietor of the restaurant was so horrified when he heard what they were doing, he threw them all out. That made them get their own space. And I can tell you that today, in Kabul, there's not a flag flying anywhere. Even the United Nations has pulled down their flag because they're all subject to suicide bombers and attacks. And although the United Nations have painted all their fences blue, so you don't have to be a rocket scientist. But these young women for change, they have a banner, it's almost the width of this theater, and it's written in Dari and in English, "We will make change." And that's what they're doing. They hold meetings every week. They talk about what the Constitution of Afghanistan does say about women and girls. They talk about what's wrong with the judiciary system. They talk about how they can change it, and they talk about the fact that men and women together have to stand up and say, we don't want to live like that anymore. They're doing incredible work, and one of the jobs they took on, which really dazzled me, was street harassment. It's an odd place to start when you consider the laws of the country are a bit cockeyed, but it is a very important place to start. It's so obvious. What men and boys say to girls and women on the street in Afghanistan is absolutely disgusting. It is disgusting. To an older woman like me, oh, they call me a whore, they call me an infidel, they call me an American spy, which I think is kind of cool. But to these young women, it's a very conservative place, and to these young women, they speak of their breasts, they speak of their vaginas, they speak of what they would do to them if they got them in the back seat of a car. They say the most appalling things, and the girls said, that's the first thing we have to do, we have to stop that. So they go in the street, and if a guy says something, and they do, they stop in their tracks, and they say, who are you to talk to me like that? I'm an Afghan. I own this street just as much as you do, and you should think twice before you talk to me like that. I said, well, good for you, is it working? They said, no, but keep me at it. I said, what if it gets physical? Nurjahan says, I hit them with my backpack, but it does get physical. They grab them by their buttocks. Nurjahan said to me, when they do that, I scream. But she said, people censor me for screaming rather than him for grabbing me. So they have a bit of a long way to go. But as all the young people do, they have nerve, and they're committed to making this change. I was doing, the time I met them, I was doing a piece for CBC Radio Ideas, and I wanted to record what these men were saying on the street, and I said to the girls, would you agree to wearing a hidden mic in your hijab so that I could record what these guys are saying? Well, they thought that was the best idea ever. So I mic'd them up, but I said, you listen to me. If anything goes sideways, if one single thing goes wrong, you just drop it. Walk away, run away. I'll be standing over there. Don't let yourself get hurt. You must promise me that. They did not listen to one single word that I said, and they took off like a band of Nancy Drews. They were just incredible. And I do worry about them. I worry about them all the time. I come home from these assignments, and their stories play on the back of my eyelids. And I said to the girls, I worry about you. How are you going to keep yourself safe? And they're, again, it's young people with such resolve. They said, we have nothing to lose. This is still a country where a raped woman goes to jail. This is still a country where a woman who gives birth to a girl child can be murdered by her family. This is still a country where, as a woman, as a girl, we have to fight to make space for ourselves. But that's what we're going to do, they said. They said, we've seen what the men can do for the last 30 years. Let's see what the women can do now. And to me, it's a whole new generation at work. I felt there was great hope in the air. And they said to me, and I love this quote, their English is fine, but I just love the way they said this. And he said, the olders, look who's talking. They said, the olders have made all the decisions for a long time. It's enough. It's not their turn anymore, it's ours. And Nurjahan said, women haven't made war. Women are not as involved in the corruption here as the men are. And you don't see 80% of the men in this country being beaten by their wives. You know, from the time I started covering a story in Afghanistan, I felt it was the women who could yank this very primitive place into the 21st century. So that is a story in Afghanistan, a place we know of with the worst oppression of women in the world. And the young women are on the street demanding, this would not have happened before. This happened because the earth has shifted. They know you are out there supporting them. They know their sisters will stand up with them. This is, to me, an enormously important change. It's just a version of the story, but the other one, because I want to leave time to tell it. This story is one of the reasons I knew I had to write this book. It comes from Kenya, from a city called Meru, which is north of Nairobi. And it's the story of 160 little girls between the ages of 3 and 17 who sued the government of Kenya for failing to protect them from being raped. This is unheard of. This has never happened before. But I can tell you their legal action was crafted in Canada, because this is the country where the women sued the government for failing to protect them and won. Remember the Jane Doe case and the balcony rapist and all those leaf breakfasts you probably went to? I was probably the speaker, God forbid, we're all up at 6 o'clock in the morning. This is the country that established that precedent. So the lawyers in Kenya, as well as, I have to say, Ghana and Malawi, the neighboring countries that come together, they contacted the Canadian women human rights lawyers and they said, how the heck did you do that? And the Canadian women said, this is how we did it. And if you want us to help you, we will. And that's when I started following the story, which is about 3 years